Etymology and historical origin of the baby name Norman. Originally rendered as Norman in Old English, Norman is an Old Germanic epithet referring first to Scandinavian settlers in pre-10th century England and then later to the Vikings who overtook and settled in Normandy, France. Norman essentially means Northman, signifying the direction from where these people came, i.e., the Scandinavian countries in present-day Northern Europe, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. The byname Norman was also somewhat interchangeable with the Norwegian, specifically, Norway is the northernmost nation in Scandinavia. The Normans were first identified as an ethnic group after the Viking chieftain Rollo was granted permission to settle in Nuestria in the early 10th century, which was then a region of the West Francia kingdom. The Frankish king Charles III allowed Rollo and his fellow invading Northmen to take the land in a peace treaty in exchange for becoming the king's vassal and aiding the rest of West Francia against further Viking raids. This land would eventually become known as the Duchy of Normandy, and Rollo is considered the principality's founder and first ruler. He and the other Norsemen intermixed with the region's native Franks and ultimately became known as the Norman French. These Northmen would ultimately adopt the Frankish religion, Christianity rather than their native paganism, and the language of the Franks, the Italic language of French rather than their own native Germanic Old Norse language. Rollo was notably the great-great-great-grandfather of William the Conqueror, the dude who conquered all of England in 1066. So there you have it. Norman was originally an English nickname referring to men from the north or Vikings, but it would later develop into a common medieval forename after the Norman Conquest. Thanks to the Vikings, a Norman was considered a ruthless plunderer and devious invader, but later became an adjective for one who was admired for other qualities: fierce, ferocious, fiery, fearless, full-bodied and full of pride. Stormin Norman. The name fell out of circulation in the later Middle Ages, but then enjoyed a revival in the 19th century. Today the name is back to being considered old-fashioned and out of date. We should also mention, however, that Norman is a fairly familiar Jewish-American surname originating out of present-day Russia, Belarus, and the Ukraine as Novominsky, but anglicized to Norman when the families immigrated to America. Perhaps from the Ukrainian element, nove, meaning new, plus the Low German element, minsk, meaning man, related to the Yiddish, mensch. From this perspective, Norman is an excellent name choice for a new Jewish baby boy. Personality of the boy named Norman. The three energy is powerful and enthusiastic. These personalities are cheerful, full of self-expression, and often quite emotional. They have an artistic flair and gift of gab that makes them natural entertainers. Their joyfulness bubbles over, and their infectious exuberance draws a crowd. The three personality is like a child, forever young and full of delight. They are charming, witty, and generally happy people. The three personality lives in the now and has a spontaneous nature. Three seem to live with a bright and seemingly unbreakable aura that attracts others to them. In turn, they are deeply loyal and loving to their friends and family. Luck also has a tendency to favor number threes. Popularity of the boy named Norman. Norman reminds us a little of Harvey. It's considered passé, yes, but it's also got a lot of character. In our opinion, this one is old-fashioned in a charming sort of way and therefore a neglected option for parents looking for something more original, yet familiar. More than 100 years ago, at the turn of the 20th century, the name Norman was quite in vogue and a top 100 favorite for American baby boys. The name remained on the U.S. Top 100 list for over 50 consecutive years, before finally falling off in 1955. The height of Norman's popularity came in the 19-teens, 20s, and early 30s when he was on America's top 50 list. His best year ever was 1931 when the name ranked number 36 most common in the country. One would think we'd see a great decline in the name's usage circa 1960 when the film Psycho was released featuring the psychotic character of Norman Bates, but the movie did little to send the name into a free fall. Rather, this is a name that pretty much dropped from circulation during the 1990s and early 2000s. 2005 is the last year Norman made an appearance on America's Top 1000 list. Only 180 baby boys were called Norman in 2012. This old Northman has actually taken a trip southward in popularity. Quick facts on Norman. Gender, boy. Origin, English. Number of syllables, 2. Ranking popularity, not applicable. Pronunciation, Norman. Simple meaning, Northman, Viking. Characteristics of Norman. Social, creative, optimistic, popular, communicative, happy, dramatic. Cultural references to the baby name, Norman. Literary characters of the baby name Norman. Norman Bates is a strong contender for the creepiest fictional and film character of all time, as conceived by Robert Bloch in his 1959 novel, Psycho, and as immortalized by Anthony Perkins in the 1960 Alfred Hitchcock film of the same name. You can forget that ridiculous remake of 1998, Vince Vaughn, Poolies, or any sequels. Based upon a true-life murderer, Norman is a classic case of the smothered mama's boy gone bad. Subject to an emotionally abused childhood in which his mother impresses upon him the inherent evil nature of women, Norman grows into a young man who is severely disturbed, and who kills his mother and her lover, making it look like a murder-suicide pact. But that's just the tame beginning. Norman then props up his mother's corpse in the house and goes about managing their nearby motel as if nothing has happened. He alternately assumes his mother's personality with his own, along with her clothes and a wig, making sure that she flies into rages every time he is attracted to a woman. Not-so-innocent Marion Crane stumbles into this little menage-a-deux, mixes up the juices, and pays dearly for it. Those who follow in her footsteps looking for her come to the same fate. The beauty of the movie is that we are as clueless as Marion at all until the denouement, when all is made clear to us, with screams and sound effects that have a lasting effect on one's psyche. A masterpiece of almost laughable evil, Norman continues to haunt us well after his unveiling, when even the local sheriff remarks, "Why, Norman wouldn't hurt a fly." Norman May is a kind and intelligent young man in Charlotte Mary Young's 1856 novel, The Daisy Chain, the story of a large middle-class family in England and their various trials and accomplishments. Of both, there are many. At the outset, Mother May is killed and daughter Margaret crippled in a carriage accident, while Father May struggles to keep up alone with the rest of the family, 11 children. Norman is actually probably in the Mensa class, but like so many of his Victorian brothers, he suffers from depression and self-doubt. In the final analysis, Norman becomes a clergyman, an excellent choice at a time when people were actively striving to discipline their baser natures into choosing the higher path of divinity. At least, we hope it cheered him up a little. Popular songs on Norman. Norman Normal, a song by Sue Thompson. Norman, a song by Peter, Paul and Mary. Famous people named Norman. Norman Norm Nixon, basketball player. Norman Carey, actor. Norman Cook, British DJ Fatboy Slim. Norman Rockwell, illustrator. Norman Mailer, writer. Norman Schwarzkopf, Jr. Army General, Norman, Norm, MacDonald, comic. Norman Reedus, actor. Norman Granz, jazz musician. Norm, the computer guy. Norman D. Vaughan, explorer.